In this class, we're going to talk about organizational culture and look at how it impacts on a business and how it impacts on the workers and managers within a business. For a start, let's look at some definitions. Now, I'm not going to go through these in any great detail. I'd ask you to stop the video and make a note of them. You'll see that many of them are quite straightforward and easy to understand. Just separate out this one, for example, Martin. Well, it simply says that culture seeks to describe those facets of human experience and behaviour that contribute to the difference and similarities in how people engage with their perceived world. It just looks at our human experience and behaviour and sees how we interact with the world. That's roughly what organisational culture is about, what culture is about. Jacques, in 1952, suggests this particular definition. And as I said, I'm not going to spend time going through these, just ask you to stop the video and make a note of them. There's one by Kilman et al., 1985. Culture reflects the ideology, shared philosophies, values, beliefs, assumptions, attitudes, expectations and norms of an organisation. I don't think anything's been left out of that definition. But again, all the words are there, and this is really the province we're working in. We're working in this context of the context of this class with words such as ideologies, shared philosophies, values, beliefs, assumptions, etc. So it's worth stopping the video and making note of that. So under organizational culture refers to the underlying values, beliefs and codes of practice that is involved in shaping up an environment, society, the self-image of members. These are all the characteristics that make it different from other societies. So we have to see the company as a type of society. It's a society with a particular set of objectives and goals, but within that organization there is a culture, there is a way of doing it, doing the job, or a way of doing the processes that are required, and this culture rubs over onto the people who are doing this on a day-to-day basis, and they take values from the outside into the business, and they also take values from the business to the outside. So we just need to respect the idea that there is this cross-fertilization of ideas between the wider culture and this microcosm, the organization in which we work. So organizational culture has a range of elements such as symbolism and leadership, which is used to enhance the employee commitment. So companies have particular procedures, which symbols, ways of identifying the business, or styles of leadership that engage the workers. And so the idea is to build some relationship with the organizational culture which will foster employee commitment. This is a very famous writer in this area, Edward Sheehan, professor at the MIT Sloan School of Management, and very well known in the area. Impossible to study this area really without bumping into his work. He developed a model which outlines the foundation of culture. Now, his model is useful in understanding corporate and national cultures. So we intend to have a look at this. The main attributes of the model state that culture can be explained and understood by analysing the core values and assumptions of any culture. So it says by analysing the core values and assumptions. The core values and assumptions. We need to come back to that. So Sheehan's layers of cultural analysis. Well, we can start at level 3, which is the underlying assumptions. Now we'll talk about those again in a moment. So you have the underlying assumptions of the culture. What do people really believe? Which generates our common values, our beliefs, attitudes and norms. So these rest on our underlying assumptions. So it moves us to what we believe. And once we've got our beliefs and attitudes and norms, we have our perceived culture, what we actually see, what we identify as the culture. So it's in 3 levels. Now, let's work in reverse order. Let's start with the perceived culture. This refers to the visible aspects of a culture, and it's the most obvious level. Here we're talking about artifacts. We're talking about visible elements of a culture. It can be anything. It could be a flag, or it could be a monument, or it could be within a business. It could be a status symbol within the business, a prize that the business has won, or it's something which the business is proud of, the same as the country is proud of a certain achievement. So the perceived culture refers to the visible aspects, and it's the most obvious level. It's mostly recognized by people who are not part of the culture. As they belong to a different culture, it's evident to them that there is a difference. We experience this all the time when we go on holiday to a different country. The first thing happens to us when we go to a very exotic country, perhaps somewhere on the other side of the world, when we get off the plane, we see different ways of dressing, different ways of acting, different procedures. That is a different culture, a different way of doing things. And sometimes outsiders may find it difficult to understand why there are these differences. These are factors that describe the group in action, such as dress code. There's differences in furniture, the working climate, the routines. Stories are important. Stories make up the culture. Stories are inherited ideas or beliefs which may be right or wrong in terms of factual content, but they are stories that are passed from generation to generation. There are ceremonies, and all societies more or less have got them. Even new societies, like say America, a relatively new country, they've got their ceremonies which are important to them in the same way as ceremonies are important to some ancient culture, perhaps to the people in the Amazon. And within organizations, we have organizational structures, that ways of doing things that managers want to preserve. They want to preserve the best of a procedure, or they want to maintain something that they're proud of, an achievement they had perhaps from the past. I agree, this may be actually holding the business back. It may not be the most efficient way of doing it, but it's a part of the culture of the business. And changing culture is a difficult thing to do. Now the common values. Well, this level looks into the factors that determine the perceived culture. These common values are developed by leaders on the basis of shared assumptions. So the common values are what unites people within the culture. But what unites them must be deeper, and it must go back to some sort of fundamental idea, some sort of important shared assumption. If they didn't have that foundation, then perhaps they would not be united in their common values. For example, how the company should undertake its daily routines, how employees should be managed and motivated. Now, the managers within a business will have to agree upon this and have a common approach to management and to motivation. But that must be based on their united belief, their common belief that there is a good way to do this, and that the way that they select will be the most efficient, and everyone will be happiest, and it's the way to do it. It's vital that common values developed by leaders are supported by general assumptions of the culture. If there's a mismatch between the common beliefs and the core assumptions, it will break down. There will be conflict between the two. If people say their common belief is, and they're operating according to that common belief, but it's at variance with the fundamental assumptions, then that will not maintain itself. It will collapse. The underlying assumptions these are the shared values within a culture. Individuals have their own underlying assumptions of the world and how it operates. So what we've got is we've got underlying assumptions of how the world operates, and these underlying assumptions will move upwards to give people common beliefs. It's what binds the people together in the culture. So we've got underlying assumptions that are very fundamental to that society, to that particular culture. Underlying assumptions are very important. They're not visible to the individual, nor are they directly related to the individual's behaviour or attitudes. They articulate human nature or human relations. So the underlying assumptions, sometimes they're not fully articulated. Sometimes they're just an accepted set of beliefs. Sometimes they are articulated, maybe articulated in law or in religious books or in company documents or in governmental recommendations. Sometimes it's just understood. It's not written. It's a lex non scripta. It's a non-written law. Perhaps deeply morally held beliefs. Cannibalism is wrong. And it's so wrong, perhaps, that people think it's not even necessary to write it down. So, underlying assumptions, which, whatever the underlying assumptions are of the business or of the country, they generate common beliefs further up, which unite the people into that culture. And moving up further into the perceived areas, it's what we see, which is in terms of dress code, the architecture, the bureaucracies, the procedures. That is the culture that we see. So we can trace it down through three levels: the perceived one, what is commonly held, which is it's what generates the perceived one. It's how people are united, but they are united upon these underlying assumptions. Now let's look at the effectiveness of the model. Well, Sheehan's model enables managers, leaders to evaluate a culture. They'll be able to understand and analyze the relationship between assumptions and business practices within an organization. So we know now how, if you like, how culture is based, how it emerges. So when we see, let's say, a business, we see how the business is operated, we see how the business is run, we see the symbols of the business, we see the business in practice. The common beliefs held by management is a reflection of the underlying assumptions that they have about how the business should be operated. Once management leaders have an understanding of this model, they can experiment by changing the assumptions. You see, to get a change in the culture, you really got to go back to the assumptions. You got to change, in the case of a business, you got to change the assumptions of, let's say, in terms of motivating people, how the workers are motivated. Perhaps a different model of motivation needs to be put in place. That's the underlying assumption. People will respond in a certain way to particular motivators. If the management believe that, it'll go to a common belief amongst the management, and what we will observe then at the final phase, the perceived level, is that the workers are responding to this set of motivators or are not responding. The need to improve efficiency could be the result of competition, regulation, policies, making it necessary to make changes to assumptions for survival and growth. So, in the case of a business, we can imagine the underlying assumptions being constantly reviewed and discussed. In the case of a country or a culture, a wider societal culture, we very seldom negotiate or try to change the underlying assumptions. These are firmly held beliefs based perhaps on tradition or on religious beliefs or whatever. So they tend to be more invariable, whereas with a business they tend to be variable. Okay, so what are the dimensions of a culture? Well, Sheehan again recognized 6 sets of dimensions. These factors determine cultures within an organization. So the first one is regular patterns of behaviour observed within an organisation. This could be done through induction ceremonies in group languages and ritualised behaviour. Group languages means that businesses have their own language. They've got a set of words perhaps which are not used in general parlance, not used in general language. They may talk about specialist components or specialist procedures in work, not common everyday language. So they may have their own language, their own words, their own terms. There may be induction programs which gets them inside the business to show them how the business is run or what the business believes, and that may be something that could be observed. And there's ritualised behaviour, the day-to-day processes, which becomes ritualised. It's the way the business operates. Lunchtime is at 1 o'clock or at 12 o'clock or whatever, and lunchtime will be 1 hour. It's a ritual. It's a rule, but it's ritualised behaviour. The culture is embedded values and beliefs. These are ingrained in the person. The longer the people work for the business, the stronger these beliefs are. And there's a belief that these values are correct. They're the right ones. They represent quality. They represent efficiency. They're the best way of maintaining the business, for maintaining employment, helping themselves, helping their country. So strongly embedded values. The expected norms of an organisation include expected behaviours of individuals. So the norms of the organisation may be to give customers the best satisfaction and to represent the business in a polite and friendly manner, to be helpful, to be seen to be caring about the environment. That could be part of the culture of the business. The rules are instructions given by management of what must be taken into consideration. These rules have to be followed by employees in order to avoid punishment. Well, there must be some discipline within the organisation, but the rules are just codification of what the management consider to be good cultural practice, good practice within the business, reflecting sound underlying assumptions, getting shared values, and then in the final phase producing an output that everyone can be proud of and is delivered with a smile and good customer relations management. And so the rules are written or broadly understood sets of instructions so that everybody moves in the same direction. The philosophy can be defined as the underlying beliefs that individuals have about people. Philosophy tends to relate to the values of managers who run the organisation. Well, they must believe management and workers must have certain sets of beliefs about the belief sets of other people, and they must be able to accommodate those. They must be able to facilitate differences, at the same time meeting the challenge of delivering a quality product. Lastly, the climate within the organisation. This is made up by such things as the buildings, the management styles, the recreation facilities, the canteen facility, the design of the building, the design of the offices, the design of the plant. It all reflects somebody's thinking. It wasn't haphazardly designed. It was put there with a purpose. And that reflects the organisation of the cultural organisation of the business. So what have we got out of this session? Well, I think the big model was the Sheehan's model, the 1958 model, looking at this three-tier development of organisational culture. And what we've done from there on is discuss these in quite a lot of detail. So I think that concludes this class, and thank you for watching.